Dr. Fenoy, if you want to go ahead.
Yes, sir. Our first workshop of the day will be our 2021 Legislative Platform Development. At this time, if I could have Chief of Staff Ed Tierney, Kathy Villavicencio, our specialists and officers of Chief of Staff, and I believe all three of our lobbyists, Ron LaFace, Megan Fay, and Rita Salznet, are on the line. So, Mr. Tierney, I turn it over to you.
Chairman Barbieri, Vice Chair Mr. Shaw, school board members, Dr. Fenoy, we're pleased today to have an opportunity to facilitate the workshop on this year's legislative priorities. On September 30th, we had a board workshop to address the board's legislative priorities. On October 16th, we distributed a draft copy of that platform, and the purpose of today's workshop is to have one last opportunity to have public comment, board member questions, or potential changes. So there's not a presentation associated with this workshop. This is an opportunity for the board to have one last look and discussion prior to voting to approve it 1 week from today.
Mr. Tierney, one quick question for me. I don't even know if it makes sense to put it on here, but we have this issue with the advisory committees not being able to meet remotely. I've talked to Mr. LaFace, and he's trying to figure out some way to get it done up there, but apparently it doesn't look like the governor's willing to extend the executive order for our advisory committees. So I don't know if it makes sense to even put it on the legislative platform, because by the time they get around to doing it, we still have months of not having those meetings addressed. And I know the general counsel was looking at some alternatives for the advisory committees to, especially Cork, which reviews all the contracts ahead of time, make sure that they get that information to us. But do you have any suggestions, or lobbyists or Mr. Tierney, on how we deal with that? Mr. LaFace?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. I did review the legislative platform in light of that issue when it initially came up, and I do think that we can pursue a legislative change under the home rule authority, or letting the district operate in times of emergencies. So I don't know if we necessarily need to add it as a specific item, but if the governor's unwilling to extend it, then we're working with the general counsel's office to develop legislation, and I feel that we can pursue it under the current proposed platform.
Okay, thank you. Other comments from board members? Dr. Robinson?
Thank you. So first I want to thank everyone for including the changes that the board discussed last time. And unfortunately, I didn't carve out time to really digest the changes here, but I have, I think, like 6 things I want to bring up. So the first, though, is just eyeballing it. I didn't see anything that talked about support for our movement to tech colleges. At least I had it in my notes last time, and I don't honestly know, did we have that conversation as a board? You don't think, okay. So it was just in my mind and I didn't share it. Okay. Then, okay,
But Dr. Roberts, do you have something specific in terms of support?
Well, I think that at least in conversations that I've had with staff over time, we are trying to take advantage of this change relationship, improve relationship with Palm Beach State College, so that we then have more CTE and pre-apprenticeships and so forth available for our students. And so that kind of change needs money. It seems like we talked about this, because we talked about West Tech, we talked about North Tech, and so I just would like to see ask for money.
If I may, we have it on the federal platform on page 1 underneath continue to monitor. If you look at that second bullet point.
Okay, thank you.
And it's also on page 3 on the state level platform. If you look at the top there, it's the last bullet before number 2, supporting state funding initiatives that would allow for. So if that addresses that, then
it does. Thank you so much. And like I said, I'm cheating because I'm rapidly going through this. My second thing is on page 3, number 4. about the charters in private schools, and in the red, so the red was staff's input, right? So it irks me just a bit, the bullet on academic instruction. And so I would just like to make sure that we carefully word that, because I'm not trying to make charter schools do what we do.
Okay.
And when I look at that at first blush, that's what it says. You know, I would like for charter schools to be able to do their niche, to, you know, their incubator, their, you know, back to the original intent, although I know we've gotten away from that to a great degree, but I don't want to propose something that says that they need to do what we do. And so I just think the wording needs to be tweaked. So I don't know, that might be more about accountability, but I don't want to take away from any creativity. I would hope that we would find more. So the third thing is, and I did not bring this up at the previous conversation about the legislative agenda, but I know I brought it up in previous board meetings, and that is, there's a state law that, as I recall, requires that we contract with a company that is embedded in the prison industrial complex. And I don't want to call the name because I might call the wrong name, but as I recall, we buy some materials from them through inmate labor. And as I recall, in follow-up conversation, the law says that we must contract with them, even though it doesn't say how much. And I think that law should be changed. You know, I mean, and so I would, you know, I don't know if my fellow board members agree, but I don't think we should be supporting the prison industrial complex. Number 4, I suspect that I've missed this too, and that is requesting dollars for post-COVID acceleration. That's in here?
Yes, so the first section on the state platform on page 2, the first priority is as it relates to COVID, that whole first section, so that'll be the first page of the platform. So I believe it does have some language around increasing funding as it relates to COVID, but we can make sure that it's explicitly tied to the academic portion if you don't see it in there.
I don't see, I see the part about increased funding for mental health services. I just want to make sure we're asking for the money that we're going to need to have more creative time on task for our young people, especially those who are in distance learning that we know statistically are likely to be falling behind, right? And so now's the time to ask, right?
Yeah. I
Okay.
know there's, Mr. Tierney just pointed out, there's I think it's a 1, 2.
The 5th bullet down.
Which page?
The
5th bullet
same
down,
page.
page 2, under the COVID heading. Increase funding for progress monitoring interventions for students who have fallen behind.
Okay.
Should we tighten that up, or just trying to get the board's thoughts on that, wordsmithing?
Okay, so if we're talking about wordsmithing, I don't like interventions, I don't like remediation. I like acceleration.
Okay.
But that's me. So that's my, because I don't like this, the deficit kind of talk. Okay, I don't know if somebody, I just finished my little pieces here, so, is there any, was this looked at through the equity lens that we are now talking about?
I think the process for this year was just to, survey the board members, have a consensus on that. So I don't think it was necessarily.
Okay, thank you for that honesty. And then the last thing is, I would like to see if we can, okay, it is my hope that there will be additional federal dollars allocated in the future for students who are considered English language learners. And I would like for us to look to see if, using our equity lens, if we can find a way to support all students that have low ELA achievement with this hopeful expansion of ELL funds. And so I think that is both legislative and legal.
Okay, for the federal platform?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. Mrs. McQuinn, did you have your hand up? Mrs. Andrews, then Ms. Brill.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank Ms. Solnet for meeting with the Hispanic Education Coalition Group on the J-1 visa program, and I see you have it under continue to monitor. And I know that a letter has been sent out from the federal government, putting a hold on the program right up until December. And when you say continue to monitor, exactly how will this work when, we have our international dual language programs, our dual language schools? What are we going to be doing within this time frame, and especially after that letter expires in December, to make sure that we're working closely to make sure that we get the teachers needed for the program?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. So we believe that I have talked to 2 members of the Biden education transition team, and they are absolutely going to let that sunset, in December. And we're hoping that come January, probably after January 21st, that the program will be, whole again, so that we can bring in teachers under this cultural J-1 visa program. So that's where it stands now. We're not going to be able to do anything before now in December.
Go ahead, Ms. Sanders, you got a follow-up.
And just to follow up with Dr. Garcia and HEC, because of their relationships with programs in the other countries, can we make a connection with Hispanic Education Coalition to let them know about the conversation that you've had, and follow up with them as they relate to many of the contacts that they have as it relates to this program? Would you be able to do that for us? Ms. Solnat?
Looks like she got disconnected.
Well, I'll have Mr. Tierney follow up with her with your request, Ms. Andrews, and we'll take care of it.
Okay. Ms. Brill?
Thank you. And so, Mrs. Andrews, we're sort of on the same page, but before I go into the federal platform, first and foremost, beyond anything else, and I'm sure we're starting on it right now, to me, the most important thing in terms of the state platform is to ensure that students will continue to have a choice for distance learning. Mm-hmm. So we need to be working on that now. I'm hopeful that the governor and the Department of Education will hear our voices, but to me, that's our top #1 priority. This is an exciting time for the federal priorities because I really have not been focused on them over the last few years, but it's an exciting time knowing that we're going to have a new commissioner, and we have a first lady coming on board that's an educator. So the first thing I highlighted, Mrs. Andrews, was the J-1 visa program. So I think that, we have a unique opportunity, and perhaps through Ms. Solnet or perhaps through our own connections, we can get a seat at the table as the federal government plans its platform. So I would, I'll be happy to reach out to Ms. Solnet, but I think we have a great opportunity because there are a lot of local connections to get our voices heard. So we're going to have to massage this, and I don't know when we're going to come back with the final platform, but I think this is going to definitely this year be a work in progress that we need to stay focused on. But I'm willing to step up, and I will speak to you to see if we can get voices at the table to focus on these priorities. I did hear that they're looking to send monies down to help the schools in dealing with COVID, dealing with testing. There's so many good things in the offing, so I think you're going to see us more involved at the federal level than ever before. Thank you.
If I may,
Hi,
Mr.
I'm
Chairman.
back again. Can I respond to that? I was going to wait until next week to tell you guys this, but I am a member of I've been asked to be on the subcommittee with the education transition team. And so all of that was, and I'm going to be working on the policy end of it. So I'm very much in touch with them. So I wanted to mention that, and I'm sorry to Mrs. Andrews, I got disconnected before, so I didn't hear her question. But before, I also want to mention to Dr. Robinson's comment about ELA or English language learners. About an hour ago, the U.S. Senate released their fiscal 2021 spending bills, and it kicks off negotiations in the House. What's important there is we have an increase. There's a $73 billion discretionary education fund and an increase of $433 million, and they've added $40 million for Title IV student support. So it is for that English language learners. And I can go into that. That's a very good chance that that's going to pass, because they need to keep the government open and they have to do something by December 11th. So, and one more thing on that, the COVID relief, which, you know, if you were in Las Vegas, I would say has less than 10% chance of moving on its own. They may actually take a section of that and incorporate it into the fiscal 2021 spending bill. So maybe some targeted COVID relief might be a part of that spending bill. So, and I'm sorry, Mrs. Andrews, I didn't hear your question, and my internet's been going up and down.
Well, if you could work with HEC, the Hispanic Education Coalition, and the leaders, you know, they have connections all across the world, and they've been inquiring about the J1, and we knew the letter expired in December. So if you could connect with the leaders of HEC to let them know that there's good things heading away for our international dual language programs, as well as the dual language programs here in Palm Beach County, to get the teachers needed.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Whitfield?
Thank you. Just really briefly, I wanted to kind of echo what Ms. Brill said about the importance of having school for our students virtually to be maintained in January. And I think that, you know, that kind of brings around another point under where we said prioritize the meaningful assessment of student learning and giving an opportunity for alternative assessment measures. As we go forward, if families are not willing to have their children come into the building for some of these assessments. After I visited a school last week, I saw that there's a difficulty with FSA rights where it has to be done in person, it has to be done on paper. And so that, to me, is a concern that we need to be thinking going to the state. How will we assess children if they don't come into the building, if they won't come into the building? And if we are forced to do the FSA, how does that work? So I think that should be in there. And then I think as a school district, if the state does come back and say that everyone has to be in the building, we're going to have to come up with plans for our schools and our students that mean that they can stay home. So maybe it's beefing up our own virtual education or something, because I just don't think telling all the families that they have to come back means that they will. I don't think they will come back. So we have to be thinking, what can we do to maintain the ability for us to get that funding and to have those students stay with us, even if the state says we have to go back. Thank you.
Mrs. McQuinn?
Thank you. Mrs. Whitfield reminded me of something, and you may have given us the answer already, but I'll ask it. I know before this year, there was an issue, I talked to Mr. Burke about it, in terms of students enrolling in Florida virtual rather than Palm Beach virtual. My question is, do we still have Palm Beach virtual?
Yes, ma'am, we do. The former principal at Royal Palm School is now the principal at the Palm Beach Virtual School.
Thank you, that's your fault. I thought that was the case. So I don't know, understanding that across all of our many high schools, we have guidance counselors balancing a ton of things. They have a lot of balls in the air. And I'd like for us to double down and make sure that the counselors understand that Palm Beach County gets the funding if you're in Palm Beach Virtual, and we know who those teachers are. If you look up virtual it's going to, if you Google virtual, it's going to take you right to Florida virtual. So I'd like for us to make sure that we're looking at our Palm Beach virtual, if we can do that.
Mr. Tierney?
Mr. Board Chair, can I address Ms. Whitfield, Mrs. Brill's comments about the home rule under state level main platform? The second bullet in red, continue to prioritize parent choice for the remainder of 2021 school year by allowing parents to make the best instructional decision. And then the following page, number 3, empower locally elected school boards and allow for nuanced decision-making according to local needs by ensuring home rule and others. So
Mr. LaFace, have you or your team members up in Tallahassee had any conversations with the commissioner or the governor that you can disclose to us as to whether or not he really intends to force the children to come back to our schools at the end of January?
We have. We've been, that's actually been the topic of conversation for the last, I would say, straight 3 weeks. We're taking a little time off for the election. But it is certainly what the commissioner is working on. He does begin the conversation with believing that children are best served in the classroom in brick and mortar, and is working on ways to try to incentivize districts to convince children to return to the classroom starting in the spring semester. And a lot of that swirls around how they're going to count students next spring, whereas this fall we were held harmless on the student counts. We don't have a good idea, and they're working through it right now, what that actually looks like. I will say that kind of like in the school reopenings, based on the data that we're seeing, we believe that the Tri-County South Florida school districts, face a little bit of a different situation than the rest of the state does. So we have been working together, Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach, for the last week and a half to we actually had the superintendents get together on a call between the 3 of them and all their government affairs teams to work on a kind of uniform approach for South Florida that may look a little bit different than other counties about how we get students back to the classroom. And if we don't meet the thresholds that maybe are established for the rest of the state about how many students return to brick and mortar in the spring, how we're still able to maintain, our full FTE count. So those conversations are being had. We expect to have some follow-up with the commissioner later this week. But that's kind of where it stands right now. A lot of it's being developed. But to us, it's the number one issue out there at the moment.
Thank you. Other comments from the board members? Any additional comments from district staff?
only there was a question that this will be voted on next week to be approved, final draft.
And are you clear on everything the board members wanted to?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Ms. Brill?
Thank you. And just for clarification, that although we're going to vote on it, we will be able to make changes to it as things evolve over the next months. Thank you.
Mr. Superintendent, you ready for the next workshop?
Thank you, team. So our next workshop will be our equity